Sisters and brothers, just to let you know that you're not the first group that has seen this presentation of information. Over the past several months, I've been invited to give this presentation to a number of organizations and groups listed here, and it received positive response, and the folks survived. So you'll make it through. But this is a new setup. I had some computer problems, so I have to use two computers. One to advance the slide, another to read my notes, and another to remind me of what I'm doing here. Dear sisters and brothers, what does it mean to be an earth holder? This is part of our being here on this earth, to fulfill our spiritual and human responsibility, to help Mother Earth, to protect her and the water and all living beings of the earth for the children and future generations. Kintu Thai, Kintu Daijong, dear Thai, dear Sangha, dear relatives, on behalf of our teacher Thich Nhat Hanh and the Mahasangha, I would like to recognize and express my gratitude to the Tewa Nation, the Dene, Navajo, Hopi, and Pueblo nations, the Ute, Comanche, and Apache nations, and the other indigenous nations of this region, the guardians and protectors of this land. Let us stand up for Mother Earth and offer a prayer to the 4 directions and the 10 directions. The translation of this prayer song is a Lakota prayer song. It means, grandmother, grandfather, to you we remember these sacred ways, these sacred teachings that you've given us. We remember and we are grateful. Grandmother, grandfather, to you we remember, this we remember. It's in Lakota, and as we stand, relatives, stand grounded on the earth, Mother, feel your connection, your sacred connection, your place here on Turtle Island. Feeling your ancestors that have walked before you and the unborn generations that are coming behind us. Sending out our prayers to the 4 directions, the 6 directions, and the 10 directions. Selaya, Wicha Wixu Yellow, Lena Wixu Yellow, Unchina Trunka Selaya, Wicha Wixu Yellow, Lena Wixu Yellow, oh. tron kasilaya, wicha wiksu yelo, leinaya takuakaya, waunspe makia pelo, unchina tron kasilaya, wicha wiksu yelo, unchina tron kasilaya, wicha wiksu yelo, leinaya dakuakaya, waunspe makia pelo, unchina tron kasilaya, wicha wiksu yelo, takuye oyasa. Otunkashla wakantanka unchimaka tati topa wiokbeata waziata wioyapatake utoka hatakia wakatakia wamakashka kutakia tunkayate lila wopila ampetu kile wopila tunkashla we chosen ina woki itakuyasi. We can sit down now, relatives. Our dear teacher, in our hearts always. Not only are we held in the loving arms of Mother Earth, but we also hold Mother Earth in our loving arms. This presentation is entitled Protecting Mother Earth, Earth Holding, Mindfulness Training, Standing Rock and Beyond. Originally this presentation was just called Mini Wichoni, Water is Life, Standing Rock and Beyond. And I chose that title because there's a lot more than just the issue of Standing Rock. Some of you have done mindful shopping at a store called Bed Bath & Beyond. There's more than bedding and more than bath products at that store. So this presentation encompasses far more than just Standing Rock. So be prepared, relatives. Our quest on earth, our earth walk, is to look within, to know who we are, to see that we are connected to all things and beings, that there is no separation, only in the mind. From our brother Leonard Peltier, to heal will require great effort, real effort, and a change of heart from all of us. To heal means that we will begin to look upon one another with respect and tolerance instead of prejudice, distrust, and hatred. We will have to teach our children as well as ourselves to love the diversity of humanity. We can do it. Yes, you and I and all of us together. Now is the time. Now is the only possible time. Let the great healing begin. The feeder roots, the canopy. Our tree relative is rooted firmly, stable, solid in the ground, connected with Mother Earth. An interconnected bond, magnificent symbiosis. And just like our tree relative, similarly, we have our roots. We are nourished by our ancestral roots, our cultural roots, biological roots, physical roots, and our spiritual roots. Our ancestors, teachers, and medicine people. And our actions produce the fruit of our compassion in action, our love in action, and our engaged awareness. These are some of my roots, some of my relatives during the U.S. military siege of Wounded Knee at Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota, in 1973. From the left to right, Chief Leonard Crow Dog, spiritual leader of American Indian Movement, Dennis Banks and Russell Means, the co-founders of American Indian Movement, and my dad, Honka Dad, Wallace Black Elk, spiritual leader of the American Indian Movement. And of course, some of our spiritual roots and spiritual teachers. Some of the crucial aspects in order for us to manifest healing and transformation and to manifest a global ethic: justice, dignity, peace, nonviolence, transformation, mindfulness, sincerity, education, conviction, courage. And around the margin, I added some other essential aspects: deep looking and investigating, waking up and seeing, truth, awareness, compassion, and action. As you may know, in solidarity, Thai and Dr. King both courageously spoke out to stop the war on Vietnam and spoke out for peace. In the words of Martin Luther King, "Until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty river." Imagine if this book was studied in every high school and university. It would be a bell of awakening for our society. William Pepper represented the King family in this civil trial in November 1999. Very few Americans know about this historic trial. Why is that? I invite you to do your own research and deep looking. Google King versus Jowers et al. It's a civil trial. Or read this book, that book. This is a sign that I made during the annual Martin Luther King March and Rally in Denver. And from a book called Vietnamese Engaged Buddhism, a chapter called Nhat Hanh's Peace Activities. It's a brilliant chapter, and it really shows us clearly, reveals how our teacher and Sister Chan Khong and others were experiencing what they were experiencing at that time, and it shows us the roots from which our practice of engaged Buddhism grew. The link is below, you can see that. I have a few copies of that chapter here. From our practice, we are familiar with noble silence, beautiful practice. However, there is another kind of silence when we turn away from suffering and ignore and deny what is really going on. Dear relatives, what we see going on in the world is a bell of awakening. We have the privilege, means, and opportunity to awaken and respond. Technological. All right. I need like 6 hands. Now I only need 2 hands instead. Dear relatives, from our beautiful practice, the mindfulness trainings, we see aware of the suffering caused by, fill in the blank, and then I am committed to an action, an engaged action. This is part of we know what to do and what not to do, from the earlier quote. Also, not responding is also an action, as is indifference, denial, avoidance are also actions. Mindfulness is composed of 2 characters. The upper character, now, is a shelter, and the lower character, heart or mind. So we bring our mind and heart into the present moment, into the now moment. Smrti comes from the root word smara, which means to remember or to call forth to mind, call forth to your awareness, to conscience, or just simply to remember. We can see the aspects of being fully present, curiosity, curious to find out for yourself, to look deeply, compassion, acceptance, and openness. Openness to the information that is new to you, to new experiences, or to that which you initially resist. You see the Dharma rain blessing us all. Mini Wichoni is Lakota, means water is life. Now our bodies are 70% water, even our bones, 22% water, lungs 80%, skin 64%, blood plasma 94%. So we see how important water is. And Mother Earth is 70% water, is covered surface. 97% is seawater, and only 3% is fresh water, the rivers, lakes, and glaciers. Now, if we removed all that water and made a sphere, it would be about half the diameter of the moon, and that little dot on the far right is the fresh water. So that is how precious Mini Wichoni, water of life, is. Mitaku e oyase in Lakota means to all our relations. We are all related. It also means all life is sacred. So what motivated tens of thousands of people to gather at Standing Rock during those 11 months? Thousands of concerned and compassionate people from all over the world came to Standing Rock. Not all of us could make it to Standing Rock, but Standing Rock made it to us, to our awareness. Gathering in solidarity, in protection of Mother Earth and the water of life, for the children and future generations. And this is some of what we encountered at Standing Rock. Militarization of police, protecting the interests of Dakota Access Pipeline, energy transfer partners. Now, a little intermission break. I really do need 6 hands. So this was in December, relatives. I was fortunate to be able to make 3 trips to Standing Rock to deliver supplies and to support. We brought up food, of course, firewood, wood stoves, clothing, whatever was necessary for the long winters especially. I went in September, October, and then 2 weeks over November, December. And my little tent is somewhere right near that dome and teepee. My little summer, 1.5 person summer tent. I had to dig out a few feet of snow just to get to the rain fly, to open the rain fly. And being a summer tent, it only had a screen mesh for a door, so snow would blow under the rain fly and come through the screen into the tent. Luckily, I found a small blue tarp and I propped it up against the screen, and that prevented most of the snow from coming in. There was no running water throughout the whole encampment, but particularly in winter when the water froze, it was challenging. So to wash my hands, I would just grab some snow and rub them, and that was it. And there was no showers unless you knew somebody in town. While I was camping in the tent, I reflected on how our ancestors, our indigenous relatives, were able to survive. They didn't have thermal underwear, socks, wool socks, snow boots, gloves, winter coats, or sleeping bags. How did they manage to survive? Especially when they were on the run while being hunted down by the US military, in many cases with only the clothes they had on that they were wearing. And while at camping in the snow at Standing Rock, I also reflected deeply on water. Most of us now are not fully conscious of how precious water is. We take it for granted when we turn on the tap with a quick turn of our wrist. But where does this water of life come from? Two important documentaries to help us understand what is happening to water today. Relatives, the information, evidence, and facts offered in this presentation are available in the public record, available for us to look deeply into, research, and investigate. There are thousands, literally thousands of references, but because of limited time, I can only mention a few references, such as the ones just before. But I'm glad to offer anyone a reference sheet. If they're interested, just approach me later, and with your email, I can send you that. So similar to a jigsaw puzzle, when we first look at individual pieces, the picture is not so obvious. But once we start to connect the pieces, the bigger picture begins to emerge, and we start to see the clearer picture. All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them, from Galileo. From Mahatma Gandhi, an error does not become truth by reason of multiple propagation, nor does the truth become error because nobody sees it. Now, another way to say that is, just because you hear something again and again on the news, CNN or NPR, doesn't mean it's true, and just because you don't hear it on the news doesn't mean it's not true. Bodhisattva of great wisdom, with the sword of understanding, Manjushri, cuts through the delusion, the misperceptions. And this Manjushri, with the leg position as such, symbolizes being ready to stand up, ready to respond, ready to take action. We have the Four Noble Truths: suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the path. For the cessation of suffering, it is crucial to accurately recognize the root cause and source of the suffering. In Sanskrit, the word avidya means to ignore or ignorance, misunderstanding, confusion, or delusion. It's the proverbial elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. Everyone pretends it's not there. They avoid and deny the reality. The antidote to ignorance, to ignoring, is vidya, which is correct knowledge, accurate understanding, and deep understanding. Relatives, if we are faced with a life-threatening illness, such as infection or cancer, for healing to be possible, correct diagnosis is crucial. Similarly, if there's abuse in the family and we want healing in the family, then we have to face and address the abuse. And similarly, if we want healing in our collective family, our society, then we have to face and address the abuses. In the upper left, fracking, hydrofracking. Upper right is deforestation, mountaintop removal for coal, clear cutting. The bottom left is the electronic voting machines and the manipulation of elections. And the other is obviously endless wars. But these are only a few of the abuses. There are many. This is pretty clear. The Chinese character to listen is comprised of these characters: ears, eyes, one or undivided attention, single-mindedness, heart or mind. So that's what is involved in deep listening, all of those aspects. So we look at some of the causes and conditions for what is happening to Mother Earth. So being informed is to help us to awaken, to expand our understanding, to deepen our compassion, to motivate us to respond, and to empower us. Shining light on some of this information that you're about to see is not for the purpose to depress us or to cause despair, though those feelings may arise temporarily. It is for the purpose to help us to be informed, to make informed decisions and take informed actions. Engaged awareness of that which impacts the physical health, the mental health, and the spiritual health of collective society. It's not about politics, relatives. Now imagine we are fish living in this beautiful lake. We are fish practitioners of awareness. And imagine on the shore over here, there's toxic chemicals being dumped into the lake. What is happening on the other side? Would we pay attention? As fish practitioners, would we say, well, what's happening over there on that side, that's politics. I don't need to be concerned about that. I don't get involved in politics. I only need to swim mindfully and eat mindfully. Clearly we wouldn't do that. So based on our practice of compassion in action, protecting the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals, not contributing to or supporting killing, exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, practicing social justice, practicing mindful consumption. Now we often see the headlines about global warming and climate change, but the predominant narrative is on CO2. We hear nearly nothing about other factors, which I will be briefly highlighting. Do we really understand the so-called solutions that are being promoted? So-called trading of emissions, the carbon market, buying and selling emission units, like in a stock market. Now, even after 20 years of analysis and computer modeling by the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there has really been very little progress with the trading of emissions. Now here we have a cartoon, the two cows are saying, the cow is saying to the farmer, we're just trading emissions. So is that the solution? But who benefits? Follow the money. We're told these schemes, cap and trade, carbon tax, emissions trading, weather derivatives, carbon credits, TTIP, TTP, all of that stuff, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. TPP is Trans-Pacific Partnership. SPP, Security and Prosperity Partnership. They sound very good, but what's really underneath them? Or we're sold a sweet, sugary cereal breakfast. Cap and trade. Buy this cap and trade. It's good for you. It's good for the environment. And this is another one. It sounds good. Reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. RED for short. It's called forest carbon offsets. But what happens, relatives, is corporations buy these RED emissions trading deals. Corporations buy the rights of the forests, which then gives them the excuse to displace the indigenous peoples, forcing them from off their land, their ancestral land, particularly in the South America, Central America, and elsewhere. So we have to be careful and look deeply and investigate who profits, Who controls the market? Who gets control of the resources and the land? This is an excellent documentary. If you have a chance, please watch it, sisters and brothers, called Carbon Crooks. And now another infection in our collective body is plastics, particularly those that end up in the ocean. Over 2 million plastic beverage bottles are used every 5 minutes in the US. That's just plastic bottles, not counting all the other plastics. Now, plastic products do not biodegrade. They only break down into smaller and smaller pieces. Dear relatives, an invitation to watch this excellent documentary, which addresses what happens when the plastic breaks down into tiny fragments. This cancerous infection in our collective body is fairly obvious, even though it is often denied, covered up, and goes unreported. There are now hundreds of oil and gas pipelines across Turtle Island, across the United States. And there are hundreds of oil spills and leaks every year, even though the public doesn't hear much about them. Remember Shmriti and Shmara, to remember? Regarding pipeline spills, it's not if, it's when. And these are only a few examples. Some of this is due to weak steel, cheap steel that is used in the production for the pipelines, steel for the pipelines. The patch-up job for this pipeline leak looks somewhat questionable. Now, there's not only oil leaks. Oil pipelines also drip leaks, and it could be 5 gallons a day, 8 gallons a day, 10 gallons a day. And when there's oil leaks of less than 1% loss of pressure, the pipeline sensors do not detect the leak, so it just goes on. In many cases, the oil companies don't even classify it as a leak, they just call it maintenance, and they go out to the leaked area and don't tell the EPA or anybody. Now, another infection taking place in our collective body is obviously fracking, hydrofracking or hydraulic fracturing. And trillions of gallons of water are used, and billions, hundreds of billions of gallons of chemicals are injected into the freshwater supply. This is because that is the water condition of coming out of the aquifers and these wells clearly indicates. Gas is seeping into the water and it's igniting. These are the shale plays or the shale formations on Mother Earth. They're all over the world, but this is just here in the United States in Turtle Island being fracked. And these are the waterways that are surrounding under and over these shales formations. 2 million oil and gas fracking wells in the US. Now, each of those patches is a drilling pad for hydrofracking, a hydrofracking well. Some of the drilling pads have multiple wells. And when we pay attention, we see it's quite obvious. And yet, politicians say that fracked water is safe to drink. Does this look like safe water? It begs the question, are the politicians somehow corrupted, or are they just lacking some common sense to see this? Why is the public told untruths by the media and government agencies? Here's the EPA saying fracking does not harm drinking water on CNN. Both the news and the agency, regulatory agency, saying that. Because of the corporate government revolving door. Round and round corporatocracy goes. Now, relatives, it doesn't stop unless we, the people, stop it. Here are just a couple of examples. This individual, Michael Taylor, worked for FDA, then Monsanto, then FDA, then Monsanto, then FDA. in high-level positions, deputy commissioner for foods, administrator, attorneys, etc. He perhaps he has a split personality. Two other examples: the EPA director, now Apple environmental advisor, then Vice President Dick Cheney, former CEO of Halliburton. Now Cheney got fracking exempt from the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act. Tells the people, the American people, it's safe. But nobody knows what killed 70,000 fish after a fracking spill in Ohio, because Halliburton and other corporations are exempt from disclosing what chemicals are used. Both parties do the bidding for big oil. So who is pulling the strings? Here the ad under Obama's, good thing we're producing more gas than anybody else. From Franklin Roosevelt. In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. And from Dennis Healey, the UK Secretary of State for Defense and Chancellor. World events do not occur by accident. They are made to happen, whether it is to do with national issues or commerce, and most of them are staged and managed by those who hold the purse strings. It is easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. And there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what is not true. The other is to refuse to accept what is true. And when our worldview and beliefs are challenged, when faced with challenging new information, most people seek to preserve their current understanding of the world by rejecting, explaining away, or avoiding the new information. The psychological term is called cognitive dissonance. From Carl Sagan, we can judge our progress by the courage of our questions and the depth of our answers, by our willingness to embrace what is true rather than what feels comfortable. Again, based on our practice, protecting the lives of animals, people, animals, plants, and minerals. Practicing social justice. Remember the fish awareness. It's not about politics. So we see also one other example, clear-cutting of Mother Earth's lungs, deforestation, destruction of biodiversity. But not only plants, forests, and countless species are destroyed, but also indigenous nations are being destroyed. This is the Guarani family, one of the oldest indigenous tribes of the Amazon. The lungs of Mother Earth. How beautiful. The rainforest produces more than 20% of the Earth's oxygen. They provide 20% of the world's fresh water. 10 million species of life live in the rainforest. But clear-cutting the lungs, and for what? Tropical rainforests in Central and South America. Often is the case, it's for cattle raising, meat for North Americans and Europeans. 80% of deforested Amazon land. Now, a hamburger cuts down about 100 square feet of Amazon forest. So we can ask, is the price of that hamburger worth it? And much of it is also used not just for grazing, but for producing soybeans, which is used for feed, cattle feed. According to the United Nations, animal agriculture is one of the leading causes of every single form of environmental destruction everywhere in the world. It is also the easiest to solve. Simply, we have to stop using animals. You don't hear much from these organizations on that subject. We have the United Nations greenhouse gas emissions due to meat production increasing greenhouse gases. Methane is 23 times the global warming potential of CO2. So 1 pound of methane has the equivalent heat trapping ability of 23 pounds of carbon dioxide. Much of this methane is caused by the meat industry and animal agriculture. So-called animal agriculture. Imagine if we called this by its true name. Would it be accurate to call it animal torture or horrific suffering inflicted on living beings? Now the upper right photo is humans in a cage, and I reflect on that. How would it feel to live your entire life in a cage or a metal pen? A leading independent medical journal, The Lancet, in a 2007 report about greenhouse gas emissions from livestock production. World Watch Institute 2009 report, 51% of greenhouse gases coming from animal agriculture, factory farm, compared to 13% from all transportation sectors combined. Now that's transport trucks, trains, cars, planes, and ships combined. The United Nations has a lower percentage. They say it's about 18%, but that's still higher. 18% for the animal agriculture. That's still higher than the 13% for transportation sector. And there's also another factor involved. There's the massive water use for animal agriculture. It requires 1,300 gallons of water use for the production of a half-a-pound hamburger, which is the equivalent of 6 months of toilet flushing or 3 months of showering at 14 gallons a day for showering or 7 gallons a day for toilet flushing. Now, if we ate a bigger piece of meat, it would be the equivalent of 2,600 gallons of water for 1 pound, equivalent to 12 months of toilet flushing or 6 months of showering. There's also the energy used involved in the production of meat. You can see a great deal of energy is required. So even so-called grass-fed beef is also not sustainable. Plus the truncated lives of those grass-fed living beings end up being shipped to the slaughterhouses too, also to be killed and exploited. So we see when we look clearly and become less attached to our habits of consumption, we recognize these contributing factors: deforestation, global greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and waste, excrement. Our sister this morning mentioned this documentary, Cowspiracy. It's very informative. There are no videos of slaughterhouses, so it's quite safe, but it skillfully examines the environmental impacts. This is another very revealing documentary. This one deals with the raising of corn in Paraguay. Of soybeans. And the farmers are struggling for their livelihoods against this expansion of industrialized soy production. This is a very moving, heartfelt film, The Witness. It's an inspiring documentary about a man named Eddie Lama, who grew up afraid of animals. Then he grew to love them, advocate for them, and devote his life to saving them. Eddie Lama says in the early part of the film, "A miracle is a change in perception." It's a powerful film about healing and transformation. And from Mahatma Gandhi, "The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. The more helpless a creature, the more entitled it is to the protection of man from the cruelty of humankind." Sisters and brothers, there is one single industry destroying the planet more than any other. This is a major abuse, an infection that in our collective body that very rarely gets addressed. A destructive industry of greater magnitude than the others. And that is the U.S. war industry. The U.S. military is the single largest consumer of oil and the single largest polluter. Over 1,000 military bases across 130 countries in the world. And not only that, there's the nuclear waste from all the nuclear-powered ships and submarines and nuclear weapons. 9,000 U.S. nuclear warheads. It is literally mad, insane. mutually assured destruction. This documentary looks at the impact, environmental effects of the war and the industry of war. It doesn't go into one key piece, which is also not looked at, is depleted uranium. DU, it's a radioactive munition that our country's been using, the United States has been using for decades now. How many of you have heard of DU? About half a dozen, 6 or 7 people. Our taxes are going to the military to purchase these weapons. Depleted uranium has a radioactive half-life of 4.5 billion years. So that means in 4.5 billion years, 100 pounds of depleted uranium will be 50 pounds of radioactive depleted uranium. It's still there. It's as old as the Earth. Now, Doug Roque, he's a physicist, and he speaks about this, and you can see him on YouTube. And this documentary, Beyond Treason, is also on YouTube. Please, if you have a chance, please watch this. And to find out also how our tax money is being used, you can go to Google and just type in depleted uranium, Google Images, or just Google, and you'll see some shocking images. So for 2 seconds, I'll just show you this briefly. Paid for by our taxes. Babies with congenital malformations. It's a crime against humanity and a crime against the environment. And it's up to us, sisters and brothers, to stop it if we want to. We know now that our taxes support the war machine. Now, DAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline, is Bakken fracked oil coming from Canada and North Dakota and Montana. And the war industry is directly related to the oil industry. The war industry is dependent on the oil industry, as you know. Oil pipelines are crossing underneath major rivers such as the Missouri River and hundreds of other waterways. So the issue of Standing Rock and the pipeline is not just about a pipeline. It's about many issues: environmental justice, protecting the water, care for the climate justice, care for Mother Earth, because Mother Earth has rights too. She has the right not to be raped and exploited and destroyed. It's also about civil rights, constitutional issue, human rights, rights for all living beings, treaty rights, indigenous rights, sovereignty issues. It's in fact a spiritual awakening. That earth is sacred, and that the movement is a call to conscience, a call to action for the children and future generations. So at Standing Rock, we witnessed Dakota Access Pipeline bulldozing burial sites and sacred sites deliberately, even after they had been marked and a map was submitted to the government agencies. These bulldozers came 20 miles a distance the night before, and they were secretly brought in and bulldozed before the sacred sites could be protected. Now, if an oil company destroyed this kind of a burial ground, everybody would be upset. It would be in the news. But if it destroys on a reservation, there's hardly a word about it. So looking deeply, we can investigate what are some of the root causes. What is the mindset and behavior behind this? We have the map of the United States, Turtle Island, from 1492, and all the way down to the bottom is the little reservations, or those little dots that you see. That represents the reservations, those little dots. And the root source, one of them could be this, the so-called Doctrine of Discovery. In the 1400s, the popes issued a series of papal bulls, and these were edicts issued which allowed to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all enemies of Christ, take the land and reduce the persons to perpetual slavery. So that was the justification. And there's a documentary about that, The Doctrine of Discovery. And from the Doctrine of Discovery sprang forth the belief and the notion of manifest destiny. Even the courts, the Supreme Court in 1823, gave discovery the exclusive title to those who made the discovery. So we see our relatives, our young relatives, and a cultural genocide when they were forced into mission schools, residential schools, taken from their families, sometimes often at gunpoint, and they would never see their family possibly for a year or even longer. If the parents could afford to travel to the mission school and visit their child once a year perhaps, if not, they might not see them until they were a teenager. And here's two documentaries, or one documentary, one film. Our Spirits Don't Speak English is a documentary about the boarding schools, and Rabbit Proof Fence is about the Aboriginals in Australia, theatrical drama. This is an excellent book that looks at a lot of the myths and notions that we've been fed in schools, high schools and even universities. It's brilliant. Now, Indians were considered wards of the federal government under the jurisdiction of the Department of War. And reservations are actually concentration camps, also known as prisoner of war camps. And Pine Ridge Reservation, where some of my relatives are, it's camp number 344, POW camp 344. Until 1978, it was actually illegal for Native peoples in the US to practice their religions and spiritual ways of life. Public Law 95341 was passed on August 11th, 1978. It's called the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, and that allowed the natives of this land to be able to legally practice their spiritual ways. Now, mindfulness trainings point us about mindfulness in our actions, about not exploiting, not stealing, social justice, social injustice, and oppression, to not possess anything that should belong to others. And sometimes I reflect on how does that apply to stolen Indian lands and to the possessing of property and real estate? Are we possessing something that should belong to others? This is another big land grab in 1975, 1/8 of Pine Ridge Reservation. Leonard Peltier was arrested soon after that. And two references, a documentary and a book. Our young sister Red Fawn was at Standing Rock for many, many months. And she is a human rights advocate, organizer, community leader with the Oglala Lakota, working for environmental and social justice. She was arrested at Standing Rock, and she's charged with some very serious felonies. The police alleged that she fired a gun at the police, supposedly while she was pinned on the ground, and she is facing up to 40 years. She's only in her 30s. Now this is the tactic. The police line moves in and singles out a person that they want, somebody who's a leader they can see. And they've been following people on Facebook. And they grab them and they pull them back behind the police line where they cannot be seen what's happening. And here the police, about 8 of them, 8 or 10 even, are on top of Red Fawn. Red Fawn is about maybe this high, 100 pounds, very petite young woman. And common standard police procedure is to put the person on their face and put a knee on their neck, on their back, and pin down every limb so they cannot move. So you've got 8 officers or 10 that weigh about 200 or more pounds with all their equipment. There's no way that she could have pulled out a gun and attempted to shoot anybody. But this is the court case, and her trial is coming up in December. At Standing Rock, we saw a beautiful gathering over 500 interfaith clergy in solidarity. Imagine, relatives, if we had done this 500 years ago, 1492, coming together of traditions and faiths, supporting one another. caring for one another. Here we have the Unitarian Universalists. Many of the denominations were there. South Dakota Bishop John Tarrant reads the Episcopal Church's repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery. Now, a copy of that was handed to some of the elders there, and they were invited to burn the document, a copy of the document. Here, the clergy, interfaith clergy, are walking down this road towards the front line where the police are. So over 371 treaties were ratified, but yet none of them have been honored by the United States. And we see the same thing happening in another distant land, Palestine. Very similar map, right? Land theft, ethnic cleansing, forced relocation, genocide. This is the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. I won't read it, but you can find it online. And the presidents even spoke about exterminating in native folks here, United States presidents. So the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, this is a legal ratified document where it was signed. 1868 also, another treaty. This is one of the generals that signed it. So here you can see the Great Reservation. So that land has not been ceded, not been given up. And the United States Constitution says, all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And yet we don't see that happening. Yeah, what happened here? Came back a week later. So we're looking at 100 million, a Holocaust here on the Western Hemisphere. Even in the news, we don't see this. According to different studies, the rate is higher than all the other groups. Here you see Native Americans at the top, then African Americans, Hispanic, whites, Asian Pacific. 5 out of the top groups in different age groups. Another one. So there are a lot of studies. And this is something else we don't hear about. So this is one of the roots that now we're dealing with the after effect. So let us wake up, sisters and brothers, and stop the raping of Mother Earth, women and children. I'm going to skip forward a bit. This large banner was at the entrance of Standing Rock Camp, the main camp, next to the Avenue of the Flags, you can see behind. 500 indigenous nations in solidarity with Standing Rock tribe. This is an aerial view of Oceti-Sakowin camp when it began small, and then it grew over the months. This is a Sacred Stone Camp, and then across the Little Cannonball River, that's Oceti-Sakowin Camp. And on this side is Rosebud Camp and some others. But all in all, there was an amazing number of people. 10,000 water protectors gathered at Standing Rock. This camp's population would be considered one of the 10 largest towns in North Dakota. So this pipeline route from the northwest of North Dakota State, running along the edge, but is actually in Lakota Sioux treaty land, but this map doesn't show it, going down to Patoka, Illinois. The pipeline reaching the Missouri, the bank of the Missouri, And that's a fortified barrier. It's called a Hesco Barrier that's used by the military. You can see the Missouri River. And this barrier is to protect it from water protectors from coming in there and trying to stop the production, the process. So that water is going to be affected with that pipeline going underneath the Missouri. 18 million people drink that water downstream. So originally the pipeline was routed this way to the north of Bismarck, which is the capital of North Dakota. But the politicians and the citizens of Bismarck didn't want the pipeline possibly spilling there down upstream from them, so they pushed it down here to the reservation. And we could also call that by its true name, environmental racism. So here you can see the treaty land of 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie. The pipeline goes right through reservation land. This was the original route. And this oil goes from Patoka, Illinois, down to the Gulf of Texas. And there it's refined and will be sent overseas for export to the export market. Even though the corporation Energy Transfer Partners and Dakota Access Pipeline say that it's for domestic use, but we know that's not really the case. It's sold to the highest bidder, so we follow the money. These are examples of other land grabs. 1887, the Dawes Act, named after Senator Henry Dawes. But I'm going to skip a little bit because of time. I'll just show you a couple more, and then we'll go forward. So you can see the pipeline being put in. By the way, the oil is already running through and under the Missouri, and even during the testing phase, the pipeline was leaking, just when they were doing the test. At one point, the security company, DAPL, had attack dogs and security there. Selma, 1965. Standing Rock, 2016. Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. Standing Rock, 2016. Very similar. That's the bite of the dog on his chest. Water protector very bravely trying to stop the bulldozer from destroying burial sites. And this picture reminded me of another very courageous young woman, Rachel Corrie, protecting a home of a Palestinian family. Sadly, she was killed by the bulldozer that our US taxpayers paid for. So I'm going to skip a bunch of slides. But actually, what we saw up there was quite shocking. We saw the militarization of police. And this has now become normalized all over the United States, in little towns and big cities. This is what it looks like. Berkeley, right? Shocking to see this. And sadly, again, it's being paid for by our taxes. This is an excellent documentary. It looks at the whole militarization. Now, how would you feel if you peacefully stood up for clean water in your neighborhood, in your city or town, with your friends and family, and were met by an army of men who looked like this? Water cannons were also used at Standing Rock. So have we really progressed, relatives? Guess where this was? And even snipers were set up there. And even an Avenger air defense rocket launcher was there on site. For what purpose? Defend the sacred. Okay. A big part of this is about banking, and I'm going to skip that, but I'm going to go fast forward. Because of a time factor. Sorry, I can't offer you these other ones. This is a quote from our teacher. I'm not really sure how to advance these, so I'm sorry I have to flash through them. I want to get towards the end. Okay. Now imagine if we have a banquet full of food, enough for a village of 1,000 people. But only 10 people hoard all the food, and leaving only crumbs for the other 990 citizens of the village. That's the 1% versus the 99. Not versus, but that's the inequity that we're faced with. Do we dare ask, why do the 990 citizens put up with that abuse? Again, it comes back to where our funds go, over 50% to military spending for different fiscal years. Now, Martin Luther King, quote, "The cost to end world hunger, 30 billion. US defense spending per year, 737 billion. So with all that money, we could provide health care for everyone, university for every student graduating from high school, put solar panels on every house in the United States. Now, Thai often talked about veterans being the light of the tip of the candle because it burns the hottest, the brightest. Standing Rock, veterans came in December when I was there. 4,000 standing in solidarity, peacefully. This is Wesley Clark Jr. in the 7th Cavalry, U.S. 7th Cavalry hat. And there was a very moving, deep ceremony called the Forgiveness Ceremony that happened. And he made a moving statement about the suffering that was caused on this continent by the U.S. military, by their actions over the 100 years or more. That's Chief Leonard Crodog on the left. And Wesley Clark's dad, his name is Wesley Clark Sr. Wesley Clark was Jr. was one of the organizers for the veterans. And his dad was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. And he disclosed in 2007 at different times at the Commonwealth Club and also on Democracy Now! That 6 weeks after 9/11, there were plans to invade 7 countries in 5 years. Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and then finishing off Iran. So there were military plans for what's happening now, way back then. So again, this ties into oil, because the oil is what drives the military. Imagine if there were this many bases around the United States. It would be an outrage. We wouldn't stand for it. Yet we do this to country after country. Now Russia is surrounded. 1,000 military bases around the world, wasting our tax dollars. Now I'm going to skip again to the very end. This is about the media. Why we don't hear about things like Standing Rock. Why we don't hear things about the oil spills and the fracking and the endless wars. Who controls the media? That's part of our awakening. In 1980s, there were 50 corporations that owned majority of media. Now we're down to 5 or 6 mega conglomerates. So that explains why we don't hear about these things. So one thing we can do regarding the pipelines is divest from the corporations, to not support the companies that profit from suffering. So that piece of paper I handed out was an introductory letter that I wrote. We can withdraw our cooperation and our participation. And you can get dressed up like this if you want to close your bank account. And tell your friends. Let them know what the issue is. Tell your institutions and colleagues. Even in the middle, there's a couple of brother monks. They're informing each other. We can do direct action, spread awareness. Hand out literature. We were doing this in Denver, Boulder, and other places. You can get dressed up in a costume or just in regular clothes too. These are some of our compassion in action, awareness in action. And the good news is, from this awareness, from Standing Rock, the city of Seattle, Washington, the city council members voted to divest from Wells Fargo. They withdrew $3 billion of the city's funds. So that sends a clear signal that the people no longer want to support toxic projects. There are many ways to be creative. So the Standing Rock was answering the call to Mother Earth. She's sending out the call. And many of us heard. Even those that couldn't make it there, we heard her call. Is for our sister Maureen there? To temporarily stop the bulldozers and digging equipment, some of the sisters and brothers locked themselves to the equipment until the police came to cut them out. Those are metal sleeves you hold inside. From Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. Walking, I am listening to a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands. The Silent Peace Walk led by the women. November 27th. We gathered here at this place, Sacred Stone, for a 3-hour training in nonviolent action. And then around noontime, we walked in silence, in prayerful walk, along this edge, crossing the bridge into the main camp. And as we walked, people saw us coming. They didn't really know what was happening, and they started to join in the line, like streams, tributaries joining a big river. And it really felt like going as a river. We walked on the bridge on this highway to the front line, where we were met by the armored vehicles, military vehicles, and militarized police. And we sat in prayer and in silence on the bridge in front of the militarized barricade and the militarized police. Probably the militarized police at the front line did not know quite what to make of this silent prayer, this prayerful action. A small group of water protectors walked down to the water to offer prayers to the water. To water is life. And we stopped. We observed from the bridge. And in powerful silence and prayer, we walked back to the main camp. And then darkness came. And those are the floodlights that are illuminating the whole camp from the police. Water is Life poster from Standing Rock. I have a few of those posters if anyone is interested. No better time than now. The oil pipeline looks somewhat like a snake, doesn't it? An upside-down flag is an international distress signal. It's a call for help. It was an international awakening, and it's still continuing. 1800s, an encampment, 2016 and 17. An encampment of compassion and love in action. As earth holders, as we heal the earth, we heal ourselves, for all children and for the future generations. From Dr. Masaru Emoto, the research on water crystals that is affected by our consciousness, both the water within our bodies and the water in Mother Earth. And from the Buddha, if we could see the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change. Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. From Chief Sitting Bull, Tatanka Yotake. This is Joan Mulholland with Martin Luther King. In this documentary about her life, it's called An Ordinary Hero. It's very heart-touching and inspiring. What one young Southern woman did in applying her compassion. Another very inspiring documentary, The Freedom Riders. And this one about what one person can do, Wangari Maathai, who later won the Nobel Peace Prize. Planting trees and working for the causes of women and children and families. Warriors are not what you think of as warriors. The warrior is not someone who fights because no one has the right to take another life. The warrior for us is one who sacrifices himself or herself for the good of others. His or her task is to take care of the elderly, the defenseless, those who cannot provide for themselves, and above all, the children, the future of humanity. Tatanka Yotake. As we heal the earth, we heal ourselves. The two actions are interconnected. And sisters and brothers, it takes courage to heal. And it also takes courage to face the evidence, to look at the information, and to take action. It takes great courage. And that courage is within each of us. From the wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi, the difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. The difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. And from Martin Luther King, justice is what love looks like in public. Our dear teacher reminding us that we are all the candle, the tip, the brightness, the shining light where it's needed as earth holders, lovingly embracing Mother Earth with our awareness and action and compassion. The future of all life depends on our mindful response. So, dear relatives, we have the conditions available to us for effecting change. So, remembering our ancestors and the future generations, let us stand for Mother Earth and offer this prayer song for the children, for the voiceless, for the unborn generations. This prayer song, relatives, is another reminder of the future generations are depending on us. In Lakota, the words mean, come to the center, come to the circle, come to the community, to the Sangha, come to the center of your family, to the center of your being. For the nations of beings all over the world, all nations of beings, the winged, the four-legged, the crawlers, the fish people that swim in the ocean, the trees and the plant people and the medicine people and the two-leggeds are depending on our awakening. They're depending on our action, our compassion in action. Joyfully come to the circle, come to the center. With courage and joy, come to the center. This is what the Lakota translation, rough English translation. So relatives, as we stand firmly on the Mother Earth, we send forth our prayer, our love, to the 10 directions, remembering our teacher, dear Thai, and the community, the monastic communities, and our own individual families, and our ancestors that have come before us. We stand grounded, connected to the unborn generations, the future that are coming our way, looking at us, to us, as we are the example for them. So sisters and brothers, send forth your prayer with the sound and frequency of this prayer song. And the drum is the heartbeat of Mother Earth that resonates within each of us and within all life. kuyasin. To all our relations, metta kuyasin.